What is up, everybody? This is the Wild Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Heskett, and this is episode 86. So we got another solo episode here. I know I'm supposed to be getting guests on here for you guys. Don't worry, guests are coming back. Just with the business merging with Lifts with Alex, things have been a little crazy, and my focus has been more on making sure the merge is successful rather than like trying to like book a bunch of guests, because usually what happens is I spend an entire week like talking to 10 people, and that's like the next 10 weeks of podcast. So that's going to be happening soon. I'm going to reach out to a bunch of other people to get them onto the podcast. I just have been delaying a little bit because of the business merger, which if you don't know, if this is your first episode, we are merging with Lifts with Alex. So PWC will be basically no more after October 1st, which is, basically only a week away. So that's what's going on. And that's why there's been a little bit fewer guests, but it's only temporary. You're not going to have to listen to me all the time. We have the rest of the Lifts with Alex team coming on. It's just they've been extremely busy, obviously, with the merge. And we did a giveaway to celebrate the merge, and it's just been very busy. And we have some exciting things coming out. So one thing is a 10-day challenge that is coming out starting October 1st as well. So if you're not in the group link is down in the show notes. Make sure you join that. That is a free mindset challenge, and we have a special announcement coming out on the 10th at the end of that challenge that's going to be sort of related to that. Anyways, let's get into today's episode. So today's episode is going to be, I titled it Doughnuts and Seed Oils because it's a little controversial. It's a lot of like hot topic things out there, and I just want to go over why things shouldn't be as scary as a lot of influencers and other people who are walking around grocery stores doing the videos of like, don't eat these foods. And we all know who these people are. Like immediately you had an image of somebody who's doing this where they're in the grocery store, shirt on or shirtless, and they're like, this is bullshit, or I would never eat this, or I would never recommend this. Instead, have this other thing, which is like 4 times the price. So when it comes to nutrition, things get a little overhyped. And it's also, there's a ton of nuance. So very rarely is there black and white things. There's one of the few black and white things is to lose body fat, you need to be in calorie deficit. Okay, great. That's a black and white rule. Getting to your calorie deficit is nuanced. And this is where hormones might play a role of, well, on paper, you're supposed to be in calorie deficit here, but you have hypothyroidism. So your calorie deficit might be actually lower than on paper due to these factors. Or maybe you don't get as many steps in. So despite what it spits out for working out 4 days a week, you can only get 4,000 steps in per day. You might be a little bit lower than what that calculator spits out. So it's more nuanced. There's very few rules. You need to eat protein, carbs, and fat to be healthy. You need to eat fiber to be healthy. But there's some nuance. Some people can only tolerate so much fiber. How much protein, how much fat, how much carbs. Like there's a lot of nuance in it. And this is where we're going to dive into these, where a lot of these influencers are very black and white, and they create a lot of fear around food. And that goes to you of like, well, I don't know what the fuck to eat. This is bad, but I don't enjoy this. I feel stuck, or my grocery bill is fucking ridiculous. And to be honest, I was one of those people. Long ago, I was one of like, you must eat this. It must be grass-fed beef and all organic. And then it was like, you know what? Fuck all that. Like, enjoy your life a little bit, because the dose makes the poison. And if you can't listen to any more of the podcast, here's the takeaway. The dose makes the poison. How much you actually intake makes the poison. So let's just take alcohol. A little bit of alcohol is not going to really like do that much. You have too much alcohol, you get alcohol poisoning. Dose makes the poison. Actually, the same thing goes for water. You don't have enough, you're dehydrated. You have just the right amount, you're fit, healthy, etc. And you have too much, you actually get an electrolyte balance, and you could, die from that. It gets really bad. And you see that sometimes with marathoners who drink too much water after sweating a ton of sodium out, and they get an electrolyte balance called hypernatremia. Right? Okay, let me let me not make sure I'm not giving misinformation. Hypernatremia. Is that what it is? By increased sodium. No, hyponatremia. It's the hyponatremia, which is when you get too much water. Sodium levels are hyper is too much sodium, hypo is too little sodium. Okay, so that's that. Anyways, back to our fucking. So the first one should be don't avoid salt. You don't need to avoid salt unless you have extremely high blood pressure, in which case everybody should be eating salt. It will make you feel a lot better. So stop avoiding salt altogether. Anyways, first one we're going to tackle is sugar and white flour. So when I take a view with nutrition, there's foods that improve your health. There's foods that can take away from your health. And then it's a continuum. And there's kind of like in the middle where it's neutral, where it's not really hurting your health. It's not benefiting your health. So that's like individual foods, but we don't just eat individual foods as well. So if we have some bad foods, a lot of times we'll counteract that with, nobody's saying that funnel cake is going to be a health promoting food. But when you pair that with kale and chicken breast earlier in the day, you're probably going to be okay. But we also have to look at your diet as a whole. And these foods only really become an issue when they displace foods that have health benefits when you're not getting enough of them. So that's the caveat. If you are eating enough, you're hitting your fiber goal, you're hitting your protein goal, you're getting all the vitamins and minerals in per day that you need, a little bit of white flour, white sugar in your diet is not going to hurt you. And this is where that 80-20, 90-10 principle comes into play. Eating a little bit of that stuff is fine. It's not going to hurt your health. You will be okay eating those foods as long as they, over a course of a long period of time, don't displace other foods. And this is another thing where it becomes over a course of, how do I want to say that? It's when it goes over a period of time, long duration, not just a day, not even just a week. Like you might feel like shit after a week, but you rebound quick. It's over a course of a long period of time because your body's really good at retaining a lot of the nutrients and getting what it can of foods when it's very low, like your vitamin and mineral content's really, really low. Your body will do whatever it can to pull whatever vitamins and minerals are in those foods out. So you will be okay eating a little bit. Now, if you choose to avoid it altogether, awesome. But don't feel like you have to. And that's feeling like you have to do something when you don't really want to, because let's be honest, it tastes good. I made apple cider donuts today, hence the topic. When you choose to do something, you are more likely to stick with it. When you feel forced to do something, you have resentment. And you kind of don't want, it's like teacher giving you homework. I don't know about you, but I fucking hated doing any kind of homework. Like, get it done in school, and then I want to go home and relax. I did not want to do any fucking homework, ever. And if you're a homework person, more power to you. That's not me. So, when you're forced into something you don't want to do, you kind of want to get out of it. And so you can do that easily because you can just go buy stuff that's filled with sugar. And those cravings start to hit because you want something. I want that, I want that. When you choose to remove it, which is fine, you can do that. You don't really get those cravings. Or you might get every once in a blue moon. So when you, like, I don't really have many foods that are off. We don't eat beans simply because I feel like shit when I eat them. So really, we don't eat that for certain reasons. But there's white sugar. We try to use better sugars, but some of those get fucking expensive. And it's like, there's really not that big of a difference. Like, if you look at like coconut sugar, which we try to use a little bit more, but at the end of the day, like coconut sugar versus white sugar, the difference really isn't that big. So if it's cost prohibitive to get that stuff, like, don't. It's not that big of a deal. So that's sugar and white flour. Again, it's not that big of a deal to have some of it into your diet, But when you have way too much and it's starting to displace other foods, like you're having white flour 3 meals a day, and that's displacing whole wheat flour or whole food forms of starch like baked potato, baked sweet potato, etc., that's where it becomes an issue. It's not an issue when it's once a day or something. So like if you're like, oh, I just really would like my wife with bread, like, oh, we had lasagna tonight. And every time, because my wife's family is Italian, every time we have pasta, you have to have bread. I always joke, you have to have your carb with your carb. It's a traditional thing. I get it. It's still funny from a nutrition standpoint. I'm like, but why do you need bread when we're having a start? Never mind. I'm not going to argue. It's not worth the argument. And I still eat the fucking bread. But that's, we might have that once a week. A couple times a week, we might do that. But the rest of the time, it's whole food forms of carbs. And while we're on the topic, most of your high carb foods, when you're looking at them, they tend not to be the most nutrient dense foods in your diet. And this is something a coach named Nate Miyake pointed out, because he was a big advocate for white rice. He liked the like a Japanese or Okinawan style diet. And he's like, most of your micronutrients and other things are going to come from meat, fish, poultry, fruits, and veggies. Not much is coming from your brown rice or your potatoes. There's some definitely. I'm not saying that there's not, and if you choose, but if that's your breaking point between like white flour this or that, like it's not that big a deal. You're not missing out on too much. You're missing out a little bit, but not as much as a lot of people think. And that's the whole brown rice versus white rice. I haven't had brown rice in years. White rice cooks way faster and tastes better, in my opinion. If you like brown rice better, more power to you. But it takes like 40 fucking minutes to cook versus like 20 minutes for white rice. So way easier to get ready on a weeknight. But the difference only comes about when you start to do like 1 cup uncooked, which is like, what is that, like 4 cups cooked of rice. Like that's where you see a difference between white rice and brown rice nutritionally. Like below that, like it's so insignificant. Like just having like an extra serving of veggies will make up for it. So just to give you an idea, you can just like go look that up and you're like, yeah, brown rice is higher in certain things, is a little bit higher in fiber, but the fiber content isn't high, so it's not that big of a deal when you're combining it with other foods, which you should be. If you listen to this podcast, you should be. Next one's going to be seed oils. This is a hot one. I'm a big proponent of avoiding most seed oils when possible. However, it is not as big of a deal as a lot of people will make it out. Now, there's 2 that I think you should absolutely try to avoid, which would be corn and soybean oil. Probably not the best thing for you to eat. If you're going to have seed oil, canola oil is actually decent. When you look at the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, it is a decent, refined, cheap oil you can use. Now, I'm still an advocate of trying to avoid them as much as possible, but they're going to be in all the packages and everything. So canola oil, not too bad. And a lot of people will say like they're rancid, blah, blah, blah. Turns out they're not when you actually look into research. And before you say like research is funded by, somebody has to fund the research for 1. And 2, conflicts of interest have to be put down. So somebody has to fund, conflict of interest has to be put down. And when you look at the data, which I've seen a couple studies, it's fine. It's not as big of a deal as I used to think. Do I think they're the healthiest? No. I think other things will be good. But at the same time, a lot of people are starting to eat more and more saturated fat sources, which is okay for some people, but for some people, that's going to cause your cholesterol and your triglycerides to skyrocket, because we want a balance of the 3 types of fat. And if you're not familiar with the 3 kinds of fat, it's monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated fat. And I'm sure you're familiar with saturated fat. Saturated are solid at room temp. Think butter, lard, bacon grease, things like that. Now, most of these sources aren't going to be 100% The only one that's close to 100% of one source is coconut oil, actually, which is mostly saturated fat. That's the only one that's most of them are a combination thereof. I think beef is something like 40% monounsaturated fat, 10 or 20% poly, and the rest is saturated. I think. I don't remember off the top of my head. But a good amount of it is not saturated fat. A lot of times we'll think like, oh, beef is like just pure saturated fat. It's not. It's still high. So we want, for most people, we want to be under about like 20% saturated fat a day. Some people can go higher than that and be okay. You just have to watch your blood work. Some people need less than that. It just depends on you, your genetics, how your body responds to it. So that's where like the seed oils have been shown to be helpful for people who, when they increase saturated fat, their blood work gets worse. Well, maybe the butter and all those other things are not as good for you. And this is the nuanced part of nutrition, where you have to look at your genetics, your family history, and watch your blood work. And if I change my diet and eat lots of animal fats, high in saturated fat, also my triglycerides skyrocket, and my LDL and total cholesterol skyrocket, and my HDL goes down, and biomarkers get worse, it's probably not good. You probably would do better eating a lower saturated fat diet. And if you do that, but you don't see those changes, you might be okay, which is also awesome. But you can't just follow like everybody should eat X, and that's that. Now there's nuance. Everybody should maybe eat those foods, but the amounts for everybody is a little bit different. So eating ribeyes for someone who genetically will get high cholesterol, eating ribeyes 3 times a day, probably not good. But eating a ribeye a couple times a week might be okay, or opting for a leaner red meat. And that gets into the all meat diet thing. Obviously, carnivore is still trending topic, and seems to have like really taken off with like, since vegan went like, that was like the super liberal thing to do, because it was like, don't eat animals and it's better for the environment, which we can argue that it is or isn't. There's many nuances there. The all meat diet went with like the ultra conservative of like, so the diet's become political. But I do actually have a client who was on an all meat, the carnivore style diet for a few weeks. She had major GI issues, and actually this week she's adding potatoes, sweet potatoes, and white rice back into her diet. But yeah, holy shit. Do not. It's good for certain cleanses. So I used it to help heal the gut, and we'll use a lot of red meat because that's going to contain a lot of. You look like side to side between chicken, pork, and beef. Beef is going to contain a lot of B vitamins that chicken is low in. So when people are like, oh, I avoid red meat because I heard it's bad for me, red meat's also really high in certain B vitamins like B6 and B12, which chicken is not as high in B12. So, and red meat's higher in iron and some of the minerals, which chicken is not as high in. So if you're trying to avoid those foods, but then you're like, oh, the doctor said I have low iron and low B12. Like, well, that's the food you should be eating. And you just have to make smart choices. So the all meat thing, not the right approach for everyone. Fiber, study after study after study shows that good amount of fiber helps reduce all-cause mortality. And what all-cause mortality means all causes of death, it reduces when it comes to like chronic illness. So eat your fiber. Everyone's going to be a little bit different there. For most people on the bell curve, you're going to do really, really good with about 10 to 15 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories that you eat per day. Some people will want to go even higher than that, and some of you might do a little bit better with lower. You just have to figure out where your body responds well to. So the all meat thing is just as bad as the vegan diet, in my opinion. Whenever you're cutting out foods, you are going to run the risk of nutrient deficiencies. You make your life harder. You make it less sustainable. Your diet becomes your lifestyle. So if you want your diet to work with your lifestyle, those are not it. Your diet, just like keto, your diet becomes your lifestyle, and you have to live around your dietary restrictions. Is that something you want? Yes, no, maybe. Maybe you try it out for a little bit and see. But if it's yes, okay, cool. How are you going to keep from getting sick, like long term? Like we're not talking like Roomba's going off in the background because it's not on the chart. My Roomba gets stuck on the cabinet right next to the charger every freaking day. Anyways, total squirrel moment. Side tangent there. So whenever you're cutting out total food groups, you run the risk that in the next 6-12 months, like what I said earlier, when we're looking at long-term health, your body's really good at trying to just like sustain itself long-term, but then it starts to break down. So after that 1 year mark, how are you making sure that you're getting all the vitamins and minerals you need? This is where you see, like with vegans, the ex-vegan community, after a year, 3 years, 5 years, they leave because their health was starting to crash because the body had stored up. Like you have stores of B12 and all of a sudden like those stores are out, or even though they're eating a lot, they're not absorbing it because sometimes certain nutrients are harder to absorb from plant sources than they are from animal sources, or the diets just weren't balanced properly, so they were just not getting enough of certain vitamins and minerals all the time, or even though they thought they did. Again, like I said, sometimes certain nutrients are absorbed at a lower rate in plant sources. So even though that they're hitting the 100% of the RDA every single day, they weren't hitting their action, like they weren't absorbing as much as they need. And if you're trying to do the all natural way with no supplements, it becomes even harder because we don't know with our food how nutrient rich those soils actually are that you're eating. So that's a whole, you know what? We have time. Because we talked about sugar and white flour, the seed oils, all meat diet, we've led into like don't avoid all meat diet. So let's go into the topic today was donuts and seed oils. So we kind of talked about that stuff. So here's one reason why being calorie deficit all the time is really bad. So I don't have the study in front of me. I wish I did. I can't find it. And if you can find it, please send it to me. Anyways, years ago, I saw this study, or somebody told me about the study. This is going back to college. Because of monocropping and things with our modern farming methods, the soils have been so stripped of micronutrients that it now takes us to hit the RDA of 100% of all of our vitamins and minerals. You need to eat 2,500 calories per day of all whole foods to hit that without any supplements. That means if you go into a diet and you're at 1,500 calories, you're at 1,800 calories, it is almost impossible without any supplements to hit 100% of your RDA of all vitamins and minerals. Because even though the package says there's X amount of vitamins in here and X amount of this, it might be lower. And some of the GMO, this is a little controversial. Some of the GMO foods, the nutrient amounts have decreased because they want more quantity than, say, quality. And before we go down that rabbit hole too deep, or you do, remember, when it comes to the GMO foods, the goal is, one, for the farmers to make money, which the farmers themselves are barely making money. Like, it's a almost dying profession. Though it's always going to be around, but it is not something most of us want to do all the time. It's hard. So it's not them. They have limits, and they need to use multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment to make $30,000 a year. So a little ridiculous. But so their goal is to maximize yield because that's how they get paid. It's not maximize nutrient quality, because that's how they get paid. So when the plant, so say like, let's take a tomato plant. A tomato plant might only absorb, let's just use easy math. Let's say it absorbs 1,000, so 1 gram, 1,000 milligrams of iron from the soil. 1 gram of iron from the soil, regardless of whether it's an heirloom or this hybrid GMO, blah, blah, blah. It takes that much. Well, the hybrid one produces 3 times as much fruit. That iron is going to be dispersed among those fruits, so it's going to be much lower. Now, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm just giving you an idea of how this could work. Now, they can, of course, have these plants uptake more. That's the glory of it. But the other thing with the GMOs is they want to make sure people are fed. So it's not that, they're producing GMOs to kill. No, they're producing GMOs, one, to maximize profits for the farmers, because that's what the farmers want. They want to see that. But it's also to get people fed. They want to make sure food is getting onto people's tables, and GMOs help become more pest resistant without using pesticides than, say, your heirlooms. And if you grow, let's just take tomatoes. You grow some heirloom tomatoes, those things get hit with disease so fast it's ridiculous. Bugs will get on them after the disease takes in, and they get wiped out. So imagine just having a field of that, and all of a sudden disease comes, it just wipes out. If you get some of these hybrid ones, and you can get these and grow them, and they're still delicious. Well, Sun Gold's one of my favorite, and it's a hybrid variety. I don't think it's GMO, though. But it's a hybrid, and they'll be more disease resistant, and they can do these traits. So GMO isn't to like kill us, and like the lower nutrient amount, again, it's about maximizing production. I'm not expert in plants. That is just a random idea of my limited knowledge of gardening and supplying my food, my garden with fertilizer and everything else. Plants will only uptake so much, and if you're maximizing yield, those plants are still only uptaking X amount. So yeah, those fruits and veggies might be lower in certain things, or they are stripped out of the soil. So back to like the 2,500 calorie thing. When farmers like ag, they're not necessarily putting in all the micronutrients that might be in a plant, like the little bit of iron or copper stuff that might not be in their fertilizer. A lot of the times the fertilizer is just like they'll put down compost, which will contain some of it, but probably not enough. And then it's going to contain nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium, which are the 3 macronutrients for plants, the NPK. Just like humans, they have macronutrients. So those things get depleted from the soil, and it's just not in the soil for the plant to uptake. So it can't, even with maximizing yield and that analogy, if it's not in the soil, the plant is just not, it's not going to be there when it comes to minerals. And those minerals are also important for the plant's metabolism to produce vitamins. So minerals, again, they're minerals. Think like iron. Like if you have a piece of iron in your hand, guess what? It's similar to the iron that's going to be in your body. It's just very, very little of it. Well, if it's not in the soil, it doesn't just magically appear. Vitamins are produced by the plant, but it takes minerals to actually produce vitamins. For example, you produce some vitamins in your body, but it takes nutrients to do them. So like a lot of animals produce vitamin C on their own. Well, that process a lot of times takes nutrients to do it. Anyways, that is that spiel. So going back to the beginning, don't be so afraid of all the food. A lot of times the fear is really, really overhyped. Nobody's saying that refined food is healthy. I'm not saying that. Don't take that away from this podcast. But it's also not as bad as most of the fitness influencers make it out to be. You can find a fine line. And I'm not saying if you're not eating refined foods to go start eating. But what I am saying is don't fear them as well. Because a lot of times we'll live on a pendulum swinging from one end to the other of like, I'm going to eat nothing but whole foods. And then you are burnt out. You swing back. You're like, oh, it is cereal in the morning, and then I'm going to order takeout for lunch, and then we're doing pizza and chicken fingers for dinner. And then you swing back, and you're on this pendulum, and you want to be somewhere in the middle, and you can kind of veer off to one side of like more whole foods, like 95-5. We can veer off like, well, I'm really more 75-25 during my maintenance. And as long as you're hitting the goals you want to hit when it comes to your physique, your fitness, your health, and again, these are the goals you want, then that's fine. If you're not hitting those goals, well, then we have to come back and look. So, for example, if you are in the 95-5 and you want to build muscle, guess what? It's really fucking hard to eat 4,000 calories of whole foods. I know. I've tried it. It's really hard past a week because all that fiber starts to really add up. Because those low-calorie foods are rough to eat that much all the time. Because your body's like, yeah, no, we're good. We don't need to eat this much. And that's where the refined foods actually really help you out. And that's the dose makes the poison. Well, if you're eating 4,000 calories, it's very easy to get all the vitamins and minerals you need in for the day. So eating refined food is not going to hurt you. If you're in a calorie deficit, though, and you're eating 1,500 calories and not 4,000, well, doing a 75-25, you're going to be at risk for a nutrient deficiency, and you're probably going to be fucking hungry because those foods are not filling at all. Like white bread is not filling whatsoever, so it'd be better off to go with oatmeal or something like that. Anyways, that's going to be today's podcast. We're going to wrap it up now because that's all the time I have for this podcast. So don't fear food. It's more nuanced. You can enjoy things, but most of the time we should be eating mostly whole foods. But we had lasagna today, and we had apple cider donuts I made, and it was fucking delicious. And there's zero guilt about it. Do I know it's high in calories? Yep. Guess what's meal prepped? Lasagna is tomorrow's lunch. But we are doing beef and barley soup tomorrow night, so your whole grain with your veggies, and there's your beef. We're actually out of venison, and breakfast is eggs, fruit, and yogurt every single day. So the little bit of refined carbs is coming from lasagna. And then I'll have a donut tomorrow, too, because we have some left over. Mini donuts, though, so it's not like the full size. Anyways, that's it tonight, guys. So make sure while you're at it, again, we have a challenge coming up in 5-ish. Is it 5 days? 5 days. To October 1st, it kicks off. So all you have to do is be part of the Lifts with Alex community, and you can be part of it just from there. So that's going to be where you find out how to sign up and participate. Go to the Lifts with Alex Facebook community. Link is down in the show notes. And while you're at it, also go rate the show and leave a review. I go through every week and look at any new reviews to see what you guys want to hear more of. If you want me to bring on any past guests, anything like that, I do go and check those things every single week. It's actually every Monday I check them. So if I do look, and it also helps get the show out there to other people because it helps boost the show up. So please give that, or at least share it to somebody who needs to hear this message today from this episode.